kids can be cool. So I was brought up in quite a racist area in Southeast London, a notorious kind of BNP stronghold. At the time, I didn't really feel like I was working towards something that was crystal clear, but my immediate reaction wasn't a reaction of, I love this place, I'm going to stay here forever. That isn't always the case. It wasn't just about the money, it wasn't just about the opportunity or the status, it was more about what impact am I going to leave on this world. There are systems that are unwritten, processes and situations that are deeply detrimental to this concept, this notion of equality, diversity, inclusion, that need to be destroyed. The work is hard, the work is detailed, the work is nuanced, the work is intricate.
Welcome back to another episode of Everyday Leadership. As always, I have an amazing guest in the booth today. He is, even though he's a Liverpool fan, I'll forgive him for that. He is an amazing man who's doing amazing things, which he's going to share about. So without further ado, I'm going to ask my guest to introduce himself, but who are you? What are you about? And then share what your name is with the audience.
Who am I? I am a husband, father of two. I lead an organization that is dedicated to equality, diversity, and inclusion. We take a data-driven approach. And really the idea is to maximize our impact, the impact that we have in the organizations we work with, the industries we work in, and also the people whose lives we touch. Really focusing on diversity and inclusion as a means to uplift us all. I think when we focus on the things that make us different and also things that draw us together, we as humans have a much richer existence, a much richer life experience through, I guess, that shared connectivity, shared vision. Yeah, I think that sums up. As you mentioned, I'm a Liverpool fan. So I was born in Liverpool to Nigerian immigrants, and spent most of my life in Southeast London, hence why I don't necessarily have the strongest Scouse accent. Children in Southeast London can be quite harsh, so I very quickly lost my accent. And yeah, for the last 8 or so years, I've been living in Birmingham. So Birmingham's the base, although we do work across the UK and some bits internationally. So yeah, my name is Mac Alonge.
You have managed to live in Liverpool with strong Scouse accent and avoided that. Birmingham, you've the last 10 years and avoided their accent, and you've just kept your London one. Like, what's the secret?
You know, I actually did have a strong Scouse accent growing up. So I moved down to London when I was 5 or 6, and I had a very strong Scouse accent. But yeah, as I said, kids can be cool. So I very quickly lost that. And then I think you reach an age where you just don't, your accent is consistent. So I think past the age of 18, maybe 21, I think it's harder to change accent. And also I think, interestingly, I guess I'm not that exposed to like thick Brummie accents on a regular basis, which is a weird thing to say, but I guess most of my life is kind of spent traveling up and down the country, so it's not just one accent that I'm kind of hearing on a consistent basis, it's many. So I think that adds to it in terms of my ability to potentially avoid a Brummie accent, but who knows what the future holds.
What was it like as a young Mac, a teenage Mac? What were, I guess, your hopes, your desires, your dreams at that point in time?
A really good question. Interestingly, I've always wanted to do business. I think as a young person growing up, I didn't necessarily know what that meant or what that looked like or what the parameters or spectrum of business was. So I always knew that I wanted to be in, I guess, a leadership position, or I quite like the idea of leading, growing businesses, operating in something, because I've always been quite strategic, I've always been quite a thinker. So it really appealed to me in terms of being able to think about things, strategize about situations, and for those to bear fruit. But as a young man, I didn't necessarily know where that could take me. And I guess at the time, so in my teenage years, I was a little bit disillusioned with the education system. For kind of context, I was brought up in quite a racist area in southeast London. It was like 3 miles from where Stephen Lawrence was killed. It was a notorious kind of BNP stronghold at the time, or just coming out of that. So the school had kind of racial tensions. I went to a grammar school, which added a different lens as well in terms of socioeconomic differences. And I didn't necessarily feel like I belonged in that system. I didn't necessarily feel like I belonged in the school. I feel like the teachers went out of their way to make sure that I didn't feel like I belonged, which is, an interesting perspective. But I always knew that I liked business. I enjoyed business. I enjoyed business studies. I enjoyed economics. But I didn't necessarily know what the avenues or options were. So I did feel a little bit lost. I did feel like it was maybe a pipe dream that probably wasn't realistic at that stage.
Were you ever encouraged? Even, I know you said that teachers made you feel like you didn't belong. Did you get any encouragement from anywhere around economics, business, or leadership in that period of time of your life?
That's a very deep question. So definitely not from school. Definitely not from school. I just remember really like disliking all of my teachers, and even the teachers that were all quote unquote cool. Just problems for no reason. I think part of it was also a little bit of restlessness on my part. Like I didn't feel like school was majorly challenging. I didn't feel like it was majorly relevant in terms of some of the stuff that we were being asked to study. I think encouragement for me came in sports. So I was really into basketball when I was growing up. I was part of a church group as well, so I think I got a bit of encouragement from church in terms of just being positive. And then I guess my parents were always supportive. I'm not sure if encouragement is like the word that I'd use to describe it, but they were definitely supportive of working hard and committing to something and making something of myself. But yeah, I guess supporting more than encouragement. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the delineation is between those two terms, but it felt more like support than encouragement, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And the reason I haven't asked that because I was curious, because sometimes you listen to people talk about some of the aspirations they have from a very young age, and they're so disillusioned that they don't ever pursue them. But you did, despite not necessarily having the best environment in a school setting. You still kind of went down that path, and even like the career that you had was very much in like great organizations, and you were in positions of authority. You kind of worked your way through that. So there was something around that kept that hope and dream alive. And I guess I was trying to understand, what was it that helped you keep on going despite what you had around you?
I think it's really weird that hindsight, I think, is a wonderful perspective. But at the time, I didn't really feel like I was working towards something that was crystal clear. As that I knew that I enjoyed business. I knew that I wanted to be a business person or operate in kind of a business environment, but I didn't necessarily plot a chart to say, year one I'm going to do this, year two I'm going to do that. I kind of accidentally fell into it, and that sounds like a weird thing to say, but I think my relationship with the education system really discouraged me from, I guess, pursuing greatness through education. So I was kind of just in education to essentially to keep my parents happy. I went to university. I could have got into a better university for undergrad than I did, but didn't necessarily pursue it. Just wanted to go to university because it was the thing to do rather than go out into the working world and get a job. And then left university not necessarily knowing what my next step was. It was also at the time of the economic crisis, so 2007, 2008. Just seeing daily reports of companies going bust and people being laid off, and I still vividly remember the news stories of people like walking out of Canary Wharf with boxes of their belongings having been fired or been laid off, and that was the environment. So my biggest motivator at that time was I need a job because I don't want to be unemployed. And there were all kinds of stories about people that had left university with degrees and struggled for 2 or 3 years to find jobs. I also had quite a few friends that were pursuing teaching and things like that, because at the time teaching was like a guaranteed job if you had a degree. So it was more, rather than having an intentional plan to say, I want to be in business or want to do X, Y, and Z, it was more a case of I don't want to be unemployed. So let me get a job and let me work really hard at trying to secure my future. And it wasn't necessarily about passion. But long story short, I ended up working in the energy sector for a small consultancy. And I remember them calling me for an interview and asking, like, what do you enjoy about the energy sector? And I was like, I had to make something up on the spot and just like trying to black my way through it. But I had no intentions of getting a job in energy. There was no grand plan to say, like, this is the route for me. It was more a case of I just don't want to be unemployed. And then, long story short, I started working in the energy sector, and it was probably only after a year and a half, maybe 2 years, that I really started to enjoy it, and I started to understand how I could apply myself, and also how I could lean on some of the things that I really enjoyed in terms of economics and business, and how that kind of manifested in the energy sector at the time. I think I was deeply fortunate to join a company that essentially allowed me a certain amount of freedom, allowed me to explore my interests, allowed me to really do a lot of things that I enjoyed doing. And then over time, that kind of love and appreciation for the energy sector grew, and I think as a result, I was more inspired to progress and more inspired to actually pursue something which at the time looked like a career in energy.
It's amazing how I get to start to think around when people are going into roles and they're like, I'm not quite sure what it is I want to do, but how much a lot of times that can just be like, it seems like a red flag, but actually there is a school of thought that says explore and see what you're good at, explore and see what sticks, explore to learn what you like and what you don't like. And if you go into somewhere or go into a space or a job that you don't like, then at least you got some data points as opposed to having absolutely nothing right now. Or you can figure out, like, actually, there are things about this that I do like, and then you go down that path, and then it becomes something of a career. So that journey of you saying you accidentally fell into it, I was like, actually, the accident is quite a good way of people moving nowadays who want to be intentional. It doesn't sound like it, but it's quite key.
It's an interesting one, though, because I think that one of the things that I've observed probably more so about this generation than any previous generation is I feel like we're quick to cancel things, quick to write things off. Whereas when I think about my first year, maybe 2 years in the energy sector, like, it wasn't deeply enjoyable. It wasn't kind of an immediate love at first sight interaction. I remember not necessarily enjoying it. I remember thinking, like, 6 months in, what am I doing here? How long have I got left here, essentially, in terms of what I want to do long term. I did see it as a bit of a stopgap, but I think there's something to be said about sticking with it and really pushing through what isn't necessarily immediately comfortable, because it wasn't comfortable at the start. It was only after a while that love grew, and after a while that I saw the different avenues and the kind of length and breadth of what I could do in that space. But my immediate reaction wasn't a reaction of, I love this place, I'm going to stay here forever. And I think sometimes we can get hoodwinked into this fairy tale philosophy, like, if it's meant for you, it's going to be perfect, and day one and day 10 are going to be absolutely amazing, and you'll just grow from there. It's like, actually, that isn't always the case. Sometimes you have to put in the graft. Sometimes you have to stick with it when it gets hard.
You did that for 10 years, and like I said, you worked at organizations like KPMG, National Grid, Scottish Power, Capital, all that kind of stuff, and did some work at UK government as well. What changed about that environment for you to decide to go down a completely different path?
It's probably more relevant to say what didn't change. So I don't think there was a fundamental change. Like, towards the end of my career, I still enjoyed the work I did. I still enjoyed the energy sector. I still felt it was an environment where I could apply myself. The things that didn't change was the level of diversity in senior leadership. There was also a perception, and although I had personally progressed, it was generally true that people from underrepresented backgrounds didn't progress as quickly as their peers. And even when I contextualized my progression, yes, I progressed. Did I progress as quickly as my peers that happened to be private school educated, white, middle-aged, middle class, heteronormative? The answer is no. So it wasn't necessarily what changed. I think the energy sector is quite a slow-moving beast. Things generally don't change that quickly, and diversity and inclusion was one of those things that didn't change. And that really, I guess, inspired me to some extent, but made it more urgent in my mind in terms of what work needed to be done here. At the time, I was looking around at kind of diversity and inclusion as a discipline, and not necessarily feeling that there was anything transformative about what was being done. So we were in a space of kind of annual unconscious bias training, and it was mandatory. A couple of organizations I worked for, and it was mandatory to the point that people rolled their eyes and kind of clicked through the e-modules or whatever as fast as possible. Didn't retain any information, didn't see it as something that was adding value. It was kind of like, I have to do this again. That kind of mindset to equality, diversity, and inclusion. So that wasn't changing. And I think from my perspective, I definitely looked at it from a point of privilege. I was privileged enough to be in a relatively senior position. I was privileged enough to be financially secure and stable, privileged enough to feel comfortable to do something a little bit different and take a little bit more of a risk with, with my career and kind of what it was that I wanted to do. And I guess I needed more of a challenge. And as I said, I did enjoy the industry sector. I enjoyed the work, the industry. I felt that I could apply myself there, but I also felt like I needed more. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about kind of the opportunity or the status. It was more about, okay, what impact am I going to leave on this world? And I don't, at the time, and still don't believe I was created to sit at a desk and do the work I was doing, which was good work, but it wasn't. I don't think it was changing things in society.
Let me circle back to a point you made earlier around you were not progressing in comparison to your white colleagues. In that space, when you see that happening around you, what did you do before you moved on? What did you do? How did you react? How did you cope? Because I think that's an element that also is not talked about a lot. We talk about a high level, but it's always interesting to hear that. Was it like being in that environment, seeing that happening around you? And yeah, rather than me putting words to your mouth, what was that like for you at that period of time?
It's a really good question. Not one that I've necessarily thought about much recently. But I remember it just being like deeply frustrating. I remember specific occasions where everybody can see that I was at a level below where I should have been, potentially 2 levels below where I should have been. My manager could see it. My line manager's peers could see it. Just everybody could see it. And it's a really weird, and I'm not sure if it's like a British thing or not, but it's a really weird environment where everyone can see something. It's common sense to some extent, and still it doesn't get acted on upon, and still there is no change. And for me, again, it was just frustrating in terms of like what needs to be done here to make sure that I am progressed or promoted. And I guess the type of person I am, I always look for mentors or people that have kind of been where I want to get to. So I did have conversations with people that had managed to progress, that were also from underrepresented backgrounds, and I really hated what I was told. And kind of again, just to summarize it, some of the messaging that I was told was things like, you have to play the game and you have to network, and I've got nothing against networking. I think networking is great, but there's certain times when your work should speak for itself. And I think in some environments you can get sucked into playing this game of, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use this terminology, but kissing bum. To say that's a lot of people are in this world where they just put themselves in environments and take on personas that are deeply misaligned with who they are in order to get to a certain position. And when I was told that, in terms of, play the game, go for drinks and network and schmooze and all of that, I withdrew, and I was like, I'm not going to do that, because my work speaks for itself. And if I'm in an environment where being excellent at your job isn't enough to get promoted, I don't want to be in that environment. Because if you're saying that people that deliver mediocre outputs but are networking and kissing bum and doing all of this extra stuff that isn't on my job description. My job description doesn't say laugh at your line manager's jokes. That's not a thing. But I am ticking all of the boxes that are on my job description, going over and above in terms of what my job description is. But you're telling me that's not enough, but it's all of this stuff that isn't in my job description that I'm going to be judged on, and what my progression hangs off. It's ridiculous. And that's that was kind of a turning point for me, in terms of there are systems that are unwritten, processes and situations that are deeply detrimental to, this concept, this notion of equality, diversity, and inclusion, that need to be destroyed. Because ultimately that's why we end up in situations where people are exploiting nepotism to win contracts, and exploiting relationships and kind of networks that their parents have built up just to get in certain rooms and certain conversations in certain positions. And those are the things that keep people from underrepresented backgrounds accessing those same opportunities. So that was kind of the one of the factors that led to me kind of pushing back and resisting to some extent.
Sounds like very much so, rather than compliant, which is you get that, you get the compliance and assimilation, you move in the opposite direction, and it kind of sparks something in you where, like, this needs to change, I need to do something about it. And obviously you eventually left and you started the Equal Group, which is amazing. But it was an area, D&I is an area, like it's right now, where people can say to you sometimes, oh, there's a lot of firms doing this, it's oversaturated, and blah, 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 blah. There's so many different statements after that. Did you ever think, my gosh, I'm stepping into an area that there are a lot more people already doing this? Is this going to be worth it? I'm coming from a completely different background to this approach. It's not like I'm even coming from a HR perspective. So did you have all those fears around creating a company around this topic, despite the fact that you're very purposeful and passionate about it?
Another really good question. I think it's interestingly, I never really had that specific fear. I think I've always understood the value that I can add to certain situations and conversations. I think diversity and inclusion was one of those areas that I guess when I joined this space, I perceived there to be a lot of individuals doing great work in this space. There were also some individuals that, okay, I'm not going to win any friends by saying this, but just weren't doing good work. There were people that had been operating in this space for 10, 15, 20 years and just year on year recycled the same presentations and the same clips, the same training. And it was just very dull. And, you know, I spoke before about kind of the perception that people had around equality, diversity, and inclusion, and it wasn't generally a positive perception. It was mainly, you know, political correctness gone mad and people rolling their eyes and, oh, why do I have to do this? It doesn't make sense. It's nonsense. And I think part of that was to do with the way that diversity and inclusion was being done. When we entered this space, we were very intentional about being data-led and data-driven. And that was something that we didn't see anybody really focusing on at the time. And then also, I've also always had this, I guess, this drive to create something that hasn't been created before. So when we think about the diversity and inclusion spaces, you know, to your point, there are a lot of practitioners operating in this space, but it's always kind of companies with between 1 and 5 people, and whilst, you know, there is space for those individuals and those organizations, there comes a kind of tipping point where, you know, the work gets real. And, you know, if you're dealing with organizations with 10, 15, 20, 50,000 members of staff, and you've got kind of organizations with a global footprint, not to say that smaller organizations can't help, but it's also a case of scale. You know, to what extent can a 3-person organization deal with a multinational and all of the things that encompass good equality, diversity, and inclusion work? That the work is hard, the work is detailed, the work is nuanced, the work is intricate, and that needs a level of sophistication about the solutions that you put in place for those organizations. And that is something that I don't think the space, the environment of equality, diversity, and inclusion has really dealt with in a meaningful way. So for me, the vision was always about creating something that was significant enough to really match the scale of other professional services organizations. When you think about accountancy practices, or you think about other management consultancy disciplines, there's always a significance and seriousness about the solutions that are embedded, and we don't necessarily see that from a diversity and inclusion perspective. So that's the space that we are really interested in operating in.
For someone who runs a data-driven organization, the stats, especially right now in 2023, are not great. In fact, I was doing some work on this recently, looking at post-George Floyd in particular, where it seems like a lot of things have actually gone backwards. How do you personally keep hope alive and keep inspiring your people and your team, and more importantly, just keep on doing the work where it doesn't feel like the data is showing that stuff is happening, but the reality, we do know it is? So how do you kind of balance both of those two things?
I think one of the things about data that people don't necessarily understand is that the nuance behind it. And when we talk about data, we talk about both the quantitative and qualitative. And interestingly, you will often see in organizations the quantitative gets quantitative in terms of numbers, who's in certain positions, what levels, you know, what backgrounds they come from, etc. The quantitative may get worse before it gets better, whereas the qualitative should, if the work's being done in the correct manner, should improve year on year. So when we talk about the qualitative, it's more about people's experiences, how they perceive certain things. And if you embed effective equality, diversity, inclusion practices and disciplines, and the infrastructure that is needed to support long-term progress, typically you'll find that people's experiences dramatically improve overnight. And then the quantitative can take some time to reconcile itself, because naturally people move on, people are promoted, people have kind of other circumstances such as parental leave or any other thing that may take them out of the workplace at any given time. So that's kind of how we contextualize this work in terms of the data side of things. I think it's also important to really think about impact. So as an organization, we've been focusing on theories of change and really getting better at communicating what this work looks like, and the commitment that organizations need to make in order to really see the benefits of this. This isn't something that you can do a one-day workshop on and then the next week you're a perfect organization. This is years and years and years of intentional deep work, years and years and years of uprooting ideologies and systemic issues that are deeply embedded from every part of the employee life cycle, from recruitment to retention and eventual exit. So there are a lot of things that need to change in terms of leadership mindsets, in terms of the way that we manage people, the way that we look at performance, the way that we see value. And that is stuff that takes years and years and years to get right. So a lot of the work that we do is working with organizations and helping them to understand this journey, but also acting as support to say, you're not in this journey alone. This is not something that you and your HR team just have to grapple with in isolation. This for us is work that needs to be socialized across organizations, across industries. There's plenty of opportunity to collaborate as well. So we're hopefully leading the guard on ensuring that industries have every opportunity to collaborate and make sure that we are maximizing cases of best practice and hopefully minimizing issues of people feeling victimized or feeling hard done by from any particular circumstance they're going through at work.
Does that mean that you have to be very intentional then about who you decide to work with? Because just based on what you said, you need to work with people who understand that, where it's not the people who are just going to be the come in and do a workshop and yay, or we want this impact done straight away. It's going to be more around being discerning about cultures and organizations and leaders that you partner up with, because it's a longer time commitment.
Yeah, and I think I've been on a journey with this personally. To be honest, I feel in the early days I was really adamant and kind of had a hard line to say, if anybody comes and asks us to just do a workshop or just do some training, the answer is just always no. So the first 2 years probably we turned down every request for just a workshop or just training, because our perception was that, and specifically unconscious bias training, because that was kind of the buzzword back in the day. So everybody wanted unconscious bias training and saw it as a tick in the box to say, yes, we've done unconscious bias training, therefore our organization is equipped to deal with equality, diversity, and inclusion. That is absolute. I don't get how good the training is. It's absolutely a fallacy in terms of the impact that it has. So in the early days, we turned down a lot of work, which was hard to do because we weren't necessarily in a financially in a great place. However, over the years, I've come to realize that there's a lot of nuance that sits behind kind of what people come to you with as kind of their first request. And a lot of our kind of onboarding or initial consultation process at the moment is about unpicking that to say, okay, you've come to us to ask for training, or you've come to us to ask for a workshop. What is it that you're trying to achieve? What are the things that you've tried historically? What are you looking to do in the future? And really being a little bit more collaborative around how we arrive at solutions. A workshop or training may not be the best starting point for every organization, but for some organizations it actually might be. That might be the way that they build buy-in, that might be the way that they socialize some of what they're trying to do in terms of bringing a wider kind of colleague base along on that journey with them. So I've softened my approach a little bit, and as an organization, we've sort of softened our approach slightly, and now we're a little bit more collaborative. We're a little bit more conversational in really understanding what people need and what that looks like, but also how they articulate that.
So it sounds very much like it's been a journey for you as well, for you and your organization, coming in and being able to recognize the fact that actually for us to meet people where they are, there might be a different approach and different lens of looking at this and analyzing it. It doesn't mean that obviously you're going to say yes to everyone, but you can actually use that initial request as a way of filtering and having a conversation with them to really assess what's really going on for them, and then take it from there, rather than just being like, you're not serious, and just kind of dismissing people. Which, to be fair, I'm definitely guilty of it. I've done that in the past as well, and I had to go through that journey. But I actually know what is behind what people are asking for. Let's talk about it and stick into that. I'm curious, as an entrepreneur, as a founder of an organization who have people reporting into you and you're responsible for, what are some of the key lessons that you have learned going on that journey?
I continue to learn every day. I think leadership, growing a business is like the single hardest thing I've done. Is that true? Maybe being a parent as well, but I'm newer into parenthood.
I was about to say, like, parenting and marriage are up there.
So yeah, top three hardest things I've done. But I think in terms of lessons, it's really, people say this every day, and kind of, I think to some extent it gets oversaid, but I'm going to say it again, that, that you cannot underestimate the importance of having good people on your team and keeping good people. And I think the areas where I've developed most are really in trying to bring the best out of people, and trying to support people in their own journeys. And I think sometimes as entrepreneurs or business leaders, we can be quite selfish and think about us and think about our businesses, and not necessarily understand the human journey and the human journeys, multiple human journeys that happen within the parameters of our business, whether that's from employees or colleagues right down to kind of the clients we work with and the workforce that kind of operates on that side. So from my perspective, it's really learning more about those human interactions, learning more about the way that I need to support my team members, and I guess understanding individuals. And this sounds like a really weird thing to say, but just everybody has their own journey. Everybody comes into certain situations with their own baggage and their own circumstances, complexities, nuances, and people change on a day-to-day basis. So what worked for John or Jerry yesterday may not work for John or Jerry today. It may not be relevant or appropriate for John or Jerry tomorrow or next week. So it's really a continual journey of learning who people are, what they need at any given time. And I think it's such a privilege to get to see people grow and go on that journey. As an organization, it's really quite a unique experience to see somebody from their very first interview or even their application all the way to 2, 3, 4 years down the line, having worked with you and seeing what they've turned into and kind of the role that you've played in their journey. And I think it's and maybe there are some parallels in terms of parenthood or marriage, because I feel like they're all about that human journey and that journey of development. But for me, I guess the other linked point is learning more about the link between how I look after myself and also how I'm then able to show up for the people that I work with, whether that's internally or externally. And I think sometimes you can get lost in that hustle mentality or kind of this um, aspirations to drive change, and you look at change as an external endeavor and forget about the internal work that needs to happen to make sure that you're changing and that you're being the best version of you in order to enact that change on an external level.
The two on the point that you mentioned around one around the people you surround yourself with, how do you hire the best people around you, people who are going to be good for you, people who not only buy into what you say at a surface level, but actually means a lot to them at a deeper level?
I think there's something to be said about understanding people first and foremost, but then also understanding their motivators. So I think understanding people first and foremost hopefully should put you in a mindset to understand what they're bringing to the table, and not just from a skills and competence perspective, but also from a, where are they in life? What are the things that they're grappling with or dealing with on a day-to-day basis? And then understanding their motivators in terms of, and this is going to sound really like transactional, but I feel like most people show up to work for something, whether that's financial reward, whether that's impact, and we probably skew heavily to people that are driven by impact. But there are all kinds of different motivators. So I think understanding people's motivators to understand what it is that they're looking for in your organization, and that may be a temporary thing that they're looking for. So, whether they need finances for now or next year or the year after, or whether they need status or some kind of validation, whatever it is that they're looking for. Just being really clear in terms of how you fit into their journey. And I guess the kind of third point to that is just being really clear about expectations. So, and again, this may sound transactional, but it's not supposed to be. But I think that the more you can understand what their expectations are of you and vice versa, the easier it is to develop a working relationship that is effective. So that's something that I'm really trying to focus on and hone in on for at least the next year, and past that, who knows.
That's not transactional at all. In fact, I think that's super important. It's one of the major areas that I've definitely seen where relationships go wrong. And whether you're a founder running a business or whether you're a big corporate, there's always that misunderstanding of what does this person want from me and vice versa. And without both of you having that clarity, there's always going to be miscommunication and confusion. And therefore, you might think you're doing your best work, and then you'll be like, what are you doing? And other person be like, I don't feel appreciated. But actually, just down to the fact that you're actually spending your time and doing something which is not aligned to what the person might be in charge of you, what kind of wants. So taking the time to do that and be very, very clear is so critical. And it's an area that a lot of people, especially a lot of leaders and founders, miss doing. There's like, yeah, we know why we're here. We know why they're hired. They know what we do. So just let them go. It's like, no. Like, even though it might seem like it's handholded, it's super important to have that clarity. So I definitely don't think it's transactional at all. I think it's very, very purposeful. And that's what kind of great leaders tend to do. So well done for actually stepping into that, for sure. And you mentioned around the fact that looking after yourself and all of that, to making sure that that's self-care is quite key for you, which is great. I guess I'm curious, how does, in your pursuit of your business and in pursuit of looking after yourself and in pursuit of living a great life for either for you as a husband or you as a father, how do you actually then measure what success looks like in the overall?
I think that's an amazing question. I think it's one that I asked myself at the start of last year or the year before. And there's a quote by, I think it's by Maya Angelou, but I'm not sure, so don't quote me too close on it. But it's success is um liking what you do, liking how you do it, and liking who you do it with. And then there's another dimension in terms of liking where you do it. Um, and yeah, I think for me, like success isn't necessarily a destination; it's part of the journey. And I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine yesterday, and we were really just reflecting on that to say like the journey is super important. I think some people forego their happiness in the moment for pursuit of something, vision that they're bought into that may or may not materialize a couple of years from now. And I personally don't see that as success. I think success has to be in the now, because the now is all we have. Tomorrow isn't promised. We may or may not reach our goals and expectations and objectives. But the one thing that we have is, how we feel in this present moment. And it's something that I guess I've really focused on more so in the last couple of years in terms of whenever I'm doing anything. So whether that's team meetings or public speaking, panels, delivering workshops, whatever it is, I need to prioritize myself, because if I feel good in the moment, whatever I'm delivering just feels that much more impactful. It feels that much more effective. Whether it is or not is for other people to ascertain. But for me, I feel better knowing that I am coming from a place of positivity and knowing that I am enjoying what I'm doing. And I think, I think a great question for people to ask themselves is, am I enjoying this? And on every level, and even to the, I was going to say something really personal, I was it, but we've started doing HelloFresh, and there are other subscription services or whatever available. Started doing HelloFresh the other day, and there was a meal that we cooked, and I was like, this is not nice. I'm not enjoying this. And so I ended up like not eating it. But I think that for me is kind of the point of life. It's not everything that we do that we'll enjoy, but having that agency to say, I'm not enjoying this, therefore I'm going to do something else, or I am enjoying this, I'm going to make sure that I continue to do things like this that bring me happiness, that bring me joy. I think that's super important. And I do realize that's a gross contradiction to what I said earlier on in the podcast, when I said that actually sometimes we have to sit in that discomfort in order to understand what it is we like or don't like about certain situations. So yeah, a little bit of contradiction there, but at the same time, I think they both have their places, right?
But that just speaks to the complexity of what makes us human. It's not one size fits all for every single scenario. There are scenarios where it's like, nah, I'm out. I'm not feeling that at all. And there's some scenarios where you need to just sit in it and get the lessons from it. And it's interesting that when you talk about some of the work you're doing, you talk about yourself and everything else. In my head, I'm like, Max, you're a very private person, but you're also out there. So when we talk about having two polarizing things, how are you both private and at the same out there? Because whether it's events, you sit on a number of different boards, you're having conversations with clients in their BD work, all that kind of stuff. So you're about, people know you, you're well known, but at the same time, you're very private. So I'm like, how have you managed to do both things?
It's a really weird one. I think it's also perception, because a lot of people say to me things like, I've been following you on LinkedIn, and I know, like, I know how busy you are, etc., etc. And like LinkedIn sees maybe less than 5% of what I do. But your question in terms of like, I'm a deeply introverted person, I guess, as kind of first and foremost. So I tend to be quite picky in terms of where I spend my time and my energy. But I guess I credit the equal group in the journey that we've been on in terms of the last 5 years, and having to be comfortable being out there and having to be comfortable on stages or on platforms or on recordings, whatever it is. I've learned to love it. I think when I was in the energy sector, I very rarely did like panels or presentations or even trainings or workshops. It's only kind of towards the last 2 or 3 years that I really started to hone my skills as a facilitator or a panelist. But with the Equal Group, it's coming from a place where actually nobody knows their brand, nobody knows you in this space. You know, in the energy sector, I had my networks and I had, you know, a decade-long career to kind of to leverage. In this space, I was brand new, nobody knew me, and I had to kind of start from ground zero. And a lot of that was networking, being comfortable, having conversations with people, being comfortable in rooms where I didn't know anyone. And I guess over time, that's just become a way of life. And I've not really stopped doing any of that because I've actually started to enjoy it. You know, having conversations with new people and meeting different people from different sectors and experiencing kind of things from different viewpoints and stances. But as you said, I am a deeply private person. I think part of that feeds into protecting my time to some extent. So making sure that I do have time for, you know, the family, make sure that I do have time to just be alone sometimes and just kind of reflect. I'm quite a reflective person, so I try to carve out as much time as possible to reflect. But then there's also something to be said about the journey. So when I am up and down the country and I'm traveling, that, you know, the time on the train or the time in the car gives me time to really be who I guess I think I am naturally, which is quite a private person. So I think I've managed to curate my life in such a way that I can kind of have the best of both worlds. So even when I'm speaking on panels or speaking at events, I tend to try as much as possible to ring fence my time before, so I can have that time of being a private person, then show up and do the more public stuff, and then I can kind of withdraw to being back to my private self. If that makes sense.
It does. Perfect sense. How do you define leadership?
I think I just define leadership as being able to do what needs to be done despite the circumstances. And then there's also an angle there in terms of inspiring other people through your actions and through your words. So yeah, I think do what needs to be done, but also inspiring others to also do what needs to be done. So I think there's a certain extent to which I believe that leaders make leaders. So if you're a leader and nobody is inspired by your actions or nobody is inspired to do something that hasn't been done, then I don't think you're a real leader.
Who inspires you?
Oh, that's a good one. Who inspires me? I'm inspired by my kids, actually. I think their perspective, like my son is just under 2.5 now, and he just loves everything. So much energy, so much enthusiasm, loves learning, loves demonstrating what he's learned. So he's one of these people that just absorbs information. So you can tell him something, he'll absorb it, and then like a week later he'll come back and tell you like word for word what he's learned. And I think that innocence and that purity is really quite inspiring to see every day as a new opportunity. Having bags of energy, having naps during the day, like that's just an inspirational endeavor. And then I guess in the wider scheme of things, I'm deeply inspired by Asata Shakur. So she was on, this can sound weird as well, but I don't care. She was on America's Most Wanted list for decades. But she was part of the Black Panther movement. She was a real activist and advocate for Black people's rights. Deeply inspired by Malcolm X, deeply inspired by Steve Jobs. He's an absolute legend.
You lost me there. You lost me in that one. Like,
So yeah, there's a couple there. Take your pick.
I guess let me end on this actually. What's the biggest change that you see happen to you, either as a father or as a husband?
I think in both contexts it's compassion. I feel like there have been times in my life when I potentially haven't been very compassionate, but there's something deeply moving about your family and people that you're connected to experiencing things. And I say compassion. I think when you talk about compassion, sometimes it can have negative connotations, or like something negative attached to it. But I think that whole mindset of kind of embracing the world through somebody else's eyes, I think is kind of what I mean by compassion. Maybe compassion is not the right word, but there are things that my kids like to do that I don't really like to do. There are things that my wife likes to do that I don't really like to do, but I am still willing to do them because of that attachment and kind of the sense to which I've brought into their experience of life, and I think those are the things that move me outside of my comfort zone and kind of encourage me to be a better person or experience things from a different perspective, because I think sometimes we can be either slightly self-absorbed, or we can really just deeply buy into our perspective and our perception. And I think there are a lot of parallels between that and the work that we do in terms of equality, diversity, inclusion. Like, the more you can see things through somebody else's perspective, the better equipped you are to change things that need to be changed, even if you don't necessarily have that as your fundamental lived experience. Understanding other people's lived experience and understanding how they may perceive certain situations should inspire you to move and to create a world where other people can enjoy their lived experience as much as you enjoy yours.
I love that. And I was starting to see that correlation of personal growth flowing into the work that people do, especially when it's purposeful work. And that's why I love when we actually see things from the lens of my wife and kids and step into their world where like, well, I don't really want to do this, but actually, you know what, it wasn't that bad, or it was a different experience, but at least you've got that perspective now, which you wouldn't naturally have by shutting things down. And obviously that naturally flows into the work that you do, because that's so real and so relevant. So thank you very much for coming on. Thank you very much for sharing your journey, and more importantly, around the work that you are in your organization are doing. It is very different. It's very intentional and purposeful, and the approach that you have, it's definitely needed. So obviously, naturally, I'm encouraging a lot of organizations who really want to do some meaningful work around DEI for their organizations, for their cultures, who want to see some real change, measurable change, both qualitative and quantitative. You know where to go to. So all the information around Mac and the Equal Group obviously will be available in the show notes, and check him out for the few posts that he might have online around the different things he's doing as well. But thank you very much for coming on today, Mac.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. So credit to you and the team for this platform as well.
Thank you very much. This is Everyday Leadership. We'll see you next week.